Right now, I have probably 20 Instagram accounts. Will be an example. Those 20 Instagram accounts are all legit because it's all tied to a business. But do they count as one individual or do they count as 20? Because that has a huge reflection as far as ad revenue. Twitter, same thing. I mean, back during the Occupy movement, I had 2,800 active accounts, and they all did different things. Now, does that count as all bots? Or nowadays, when you have things like social flow and everything else, where it's tied to a corporation, are those counted as bots, or is those counted as individual accounts where it's pushing data? So defining bot is probably the biggest problem I see.
Another thing is that there's a great article from NPR about 4 years ago. They're saying how much of the internet is fake. Turns out a lot apparently, and they're talking about this mythical event in the future where there's more bots on the internet than people, and this kind of ties into the fake internet theory or the dead internet theory that the internet died a couple years ago and we just didn't notice it, and it's all turned to an AI a while ago, which is obviously not true. But it's interesting because of the implications of, well, how would you know if it wasn't? One thing that's interesting is in that article from the NPR thing that's like how much of the internet is fake. A lot of it actually, I'll post the link in the chat for it so we can put it in the Twitter. But the what's interesting is they quote the former CEO of Reddit, and she was saying that tracking unique users on very very basic things, like let's say you're in a car and it disconnects from the mobile station, on the cell phone station, and goes to the next zone. When it reloads the page, does that count as a unique viewer, or is it the same thing? They were never able to filter that out. Now the thing is that for them though, that number keep going up is in their best interest for advertiser revenue, for their valuations, for their investors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's actually not in their best interest to actually have an accurate count of this and to kind of hand wavy them, round it up on each time. The thing is, because this is industry wide practices, it's gotten so out of hand that it no longer corresponds to reality, and it presents an enormous opportunity for bad faith actors at the nation state level, but also at the scamming level, just to essentially use that for manipulation. But the only reason why it's open for manipulation in that first place is because the business model itself is based around manipulating people. That's the whole point of advertising. You have a certain thing, people are happy. Doesn't matter. You need to essentially see some ad that says your body isn't worth it, or that you have some sort of a need that needs to be met, and you won't be happy unless you buy product X. That's the core thing of what advertising is. By the time that you're done with that, people will now go on and make a purchase. The thing about this, though, is that when you do it on this scale and the ability to manipulate, with Cambridge Analytica style manipulate nation states, etc., it presents an extremely attractive target to take advantage of any algorithmic or technological shortcomings. But even if we solve those technological shortcomings, the business case will still be there. And until that's addressed, we'll still see emergence of these problems.
Right. So automating some of the stuff is so easy. So I used to create troll bots. Like if you would say certain keywords, it would go and say something back to you, for the sole purpose of fun, and that's kind of like the hacker mindset. So what are hackers doing? What are the red team guys doing to create these fake accounts in the hope of testing your security? That's the other scenario. I have numerous ones that are designed just for that, because you can't do anything against clone attacks. You can't do anything, against automated attacks. And I think where Elon's coming from the bot issue is when you look at the people who he's looking to partner with, financial networks, things like that. If you have the right number of bots, you can use it to manipulate penny stocks. Okay, that's one scenario. Other scenarios are, you can literally burn up a small business's marketing budget with these bots because it's based on retweets, likes, responses, anything like that. So if I were to use an IFTT or Wolfram Alpha or anything like that, and say, okay, this person said this, we'll start an argument with them going back and forth. And you could pretty much train them to do that. Now imagine nowadays with GPT-3, if I were to take that and unleash it on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of that, what are the ramifications? Back then, it only took 400 bots to make something trend. Now it takes about 4,800.
Okay. Moving right along. Twitter reiterates its estimate that the average of false or spam accounts represents fewer than 5% of monthly active users in Q2. Okay. Well, then that somebody should say, well, show us how you came to that data, came to that number. What is the actual number that you came up with, and how did you come up with it? And although they say that we sampled 100 accounts every day or once a month, Jesus Christ. Anyway, the next is from CNBC. Snapchat does its Q2 revenue. We are in what's called earnings seasons, folks. Back to earnings season. We're going to be doing a lot of these. You've got Twitter coming up today. We just did Twitter. Early next week, you got Google and Microsoft and Facebook and Qualcomm and Spotify and Shopify and Apple and Amazon and Intel and Sony and Uber and Airbnb. All are coming up next week. But right now, the story turns to Snapchat, who just did their quarter earnings report. And the question is, because when they do their quarter earnings reports, the market has a certain expectation, and analysts have analyzed and scrutinized and are paid a lot of money to try and guess how Snapchat did before they reveal the numbers.
Reading
And
the tea leaves.
the question is, did Snapchat do better than the analysts expect, or worse, or equal to? And if you guess correctly, more than 50% of the time, you can quit your job right now. uh, and that
There's a friend of mine that literally made a whole career with trading for, and not he worked at JP Morgan, and his sole thing is the way this algorithm worked was not essentially looking at the market performance, although they did do some of that. The highest signal they found, if they looked at like 80 different signals or so, the highest one was whether or not the analysts were accurate in the past. And what's hilarious is they actually created a trading algorithm just going, can this analyst actually be trusted, or do they not know what they're talking about? And one of the most hilarious things was one of the more useful ones was the analyst who reliably predicted things wrong, and they just do the opposite of what those guys were saying. But yeah, those track records are public and they can be analyzed, but it's not done as often as you think it would be. You could say the most crazy shit, and those buy sell
That
ratings
is
will just
so
stand.
true for some even TV personalities and our friends. There's a group of us, we do exactly opposite of what they say. If they say sell, we buy. And if they say buy, we sell. And it works 100%, going opposite to what they're saying.
so here's your chance to play day trader. Do you think Snapchat outperformed the market, as it's called, or analysts, in their quarter earnings report? Would you be buying Snapchat the day before yesterday, or would you be shorting it, assuming that the price will go down, meaning they didn't meet expectations, so to speak? Anyone feels strongly one way or the other? If you guessed that they're going to have a down quarter, you would be correct. The stock's currently trading down 35%. That's what happens when you don't have a good book report for the class. So that's not good, and I imagine that's related to all of the data and whatnot as well. So they missed on the top and bottom lines in its second quarter earnings report. The company authorized a stock repurchasing program, and related article, Snap plans to quote unquote substantially reduce hiring. Really? I haven't heard any other companies doing this. Yeah, obviously everyone's doing that. So the next topic is that the Ukraine says that hackers, I'll let you guess where from, attacked something called TAVR Media, which operates 9 radio stations in Ukraine, to broadcast a fake message that President Zelensky was in critical condition. Now, who would do such a thing?
Botswana.
No way that
Botswana. We've always known that they've been quiet this entire time. I haven't heard of them in months. It's got to be them.
You heard it here first, folks. We happen to have a little insight info. Chris never gets it wrong. Speaking of analysts,
There's
you
Chris,
get it
the,
right.
the
Chris, tell us the
sarcasm
answer.
packed in there somewhere.
Come on.
Botswana. Okay. So,
Has anyone heard any news about, like, you see these countries on the map? You look at a globe, and like it's like they have all these fancy names and things. Have you heard any news items about Botswana in like 8 years? Like anyone? We hear like thousands of pieces of information about, like, certain places in the world, but there are places that are like nothing. And sometimes I just wonder, like, why the focus?
Well, I was just there last month. I enjoy the country, so sometimes no news is good news.
no
So
news is
pretty
good
That
news
is a
peaceful
indeed.
country.
good thing to say.
And indeed, especially if you're like making progress, yeah, just keep your head down, keep the ball moving. So the next one is that Instagram says all new any new video posts that people make on Instagram, which are under 15 minutes, which is basically every video on Instagram, will now be shared as reels. And I think you know why.
15? Did you say
And
15 minutes?
yes, all videos under 15 minutes, which again is 99.999% of videos in Instagram are under 15 minutes. So those will now be treated as reels, which is their version of TikTok, right? And of videos under 90 seconds from public accounts, meaning non-private accounts, meaning every video you've ever seen, really, will be recommended to others, meaning not just people who follow you. Meaning, we're just gonna fucking clone TikTok, y'all. Forget, and you have to kind of admire Mark Zuckerberg's ability to realize somebody else has come up with something better and just take your baby and just slaughter that thing and just straight up gangster clone the thing that's kicking his ass. Most people don't have the moral vacuum to do that.
Tyler.
Yes,
If you remember, he started Facebook based on Hot or Not, and then
yes.
after
Yeah,
that, that
seriously,
you
man.
look at
I wouldn't put it past him.
No, he's
right,
been
and
doing this
you
from
look
the
at
beginning.
Microsoft. Well,
Facebook,
Gates.
Facebook from the beginning. It, just as Tom is saying, was a sort of clone of James Hong's Hot or Not, which was at that time a very popular site. And then it turned Twitter came out, and then it became very Twitter like, and then Snapchat came out, and then became rather Snapchat like, and then now TikTok's kicking his ass, and now he's just straight up rolling it out as TikTok. I, it's
Hey Tyler, do you
yes.
have that road? Do you have that road blast? That Roadmaster?
What do you
Do you
mean?
have the what you used to on Club Deck? Do you still use it? Like where you have
Oh,
different sounds
Roadcaster
and
Pro?
stuff?
No, I don't. No.
It would be nice if you had that because you'd have to do the Snoop Dogg gangster one. Like you'd have to do that for Mark Zuckerberg because he seems to be just like riding the coattails of other people's success. But that would be really funny if you had that soundbite.
He could do that on Club Deck.
Yes, could do.
Well,
Um,
don't forget. I mean, Microsoft did the same thing. Apple did the same thing, and it seems like Microsoft keeps going back to that model because now you got Linux embedded in Windows and all of that.
Well, Tyler, it's a real fascinating thing because isn't it Coco Chanel said the highest form of flattery is someone copying and working in the fashion industry for so long. The highest form of flattery is obviously like copying it. It's not exactly the same, but sometimes it's also important as a strategic business to not reinvent the wheel if it's already done. What I'd be curious to see, Tyler, is how is he going to embellish on it to make it supersede the success that TikTok has? That's what I would say.
so the problem is you're now going to start seeing content from people you don't follow, and people who
Oh,
don't
but
follow,
Tyler, they
and
just
people who
announced something, Tyler, about
hold
that. They just announced something of Facebook about that they're going to allow it to only be seen by certain people. So they are taking something else where you'll only be like something like the FYP page where it'll only they're introducing where you'll only see it, it'll only be seen by certain people in your Facebook. I'm looking for that article now because I remember I saw that this morning.
But
Yeah, and
there's
Instagram is all over the place. They're starting to throw tons of people that you don't follow. Or you can also tag other people, and as you tag them, you start seeing both of them.
somebody tweeted, "This is what the panic button looks like." Confirmed. Instagram will make every video a reel. All new video posts will be shared as reels. Video posts prior to this change will remain as videos. Instagram's merging videos and reels tab into one tab on your profile. So it's going to be reels, and reels are going to be shared beyond the people who follow you, so that they can go head to head with TikTok. They're just copying TikTok. They're rejiggering Instagram to the functionality of TikTok. And let's be
This
real,
shit, I was going to say that this shit's getting real.
shit is getting reels. Reels with a Z. And why would it's one of those things. When you're a startup and you have a competitor that's kicking your ass, I mean, if you've got a whole bunch of investors, your investors are going to tell you, listen, it's time to just copy that shit and don't be sanctimonious about it. Just,
I think Facebook's a little larger than like
I
a
know.
startup. They're kind of,
That's
larger
what's
than
so
most oil
amazing.
companies.
That's what's so amazing about it. Is startups now, this is part of startup culture now, that your investors will tell you to do this. Like, listen, put your ego aside. You feel that sting? That's ego. That's pride fucking with you. You
And I
know,
want to make money, and I want to get my investment back. And there's a
right?
90% failure rate right behind you with things, and I don't want to be one of those 90%. My portfolio is going to be. I need to windfall this thing soon. The LPs, they're getting nervous. We need to exit this thing. Make that valuation skyrocket. Copy that thing. I know it will work. Please clone them faster. I don't care about your vision for the world. That was just a guess in the door. These are the voices of the VCs here.
Amazing. Um, Kara Swisher did a tweet about, I mean, they announced yesterday Facebook's essentially doing the same. You cannot be creative if you are not creative. Facebook forsakes friends and family to compete with TikTok.
What a great headline.
She calls them like she sees them. So there you go. Next big topic, Hashflow, a DeFi trading app, raises $25 million. From Coinbase and Kraken and the other big exchanges. Okay, next up, FCC chair asks carriers, meaning telecommunications companies, to explain how they use geolocation data, as Congress debates a law that may preempt the FCC from regulating carriers' privacy practices.
Okay, real quick, newsflash. 20 years ago, there was this whole thing. I was in these technical communities, and they were saying, what is the government requiring us to put the GPS accurate data on the cell phones? They said you were requiring this use for every cell phone manufactured must have this data included. And they say, why do you need this? They say because we need to have accurate 911 calls. And now what's interesting about the 911 service is about 89% of it has nothing to do with actual emergencies. Most of it's, I saw a black person down the street. You look it up. It's crazy when you look at the history of the 911 service. It's not what most people think it is. It was also used for, I think some people are protesting or organizing for a protest for civil rights stuff. That was where its origin was. Now, maybe it's been used for saving lives since then, etc. Yes, there's been some good that's come of it, but that wasn't the original purpose, and that's not the way that it's mostly used. You don't need to call it for a noise complaint, but that's how it's usually done. So that was what we put this thing in for at a great expense, at extreme cost. And now you've got a very large portion of the tech industry that requires usage of this because their business models depend on it. But it was put in there in kind of slightly false pretenses that we build all this in. But what's crazy about this is that was from a legal precedent from ostensibly the same group right now that's going shock and horror. How are people using this geolocation data? No one could have possibly have foreseen this. except every single freaking advisor and every single technical person that said this will be abused for privacy stuff. You sure you want that in there? You sure you want that in there? It's the same government regulator that basically caused the problem to begin with 2 decades ago. But I'm not convinced of the competence of the group that's doing this or necessarily the good faith. How their solution forever they talk about require if they actually even bother to touch it for this. What the government's actually in this specific case doing is trying to deflect some of the blame and saying, "Oh, government is good. We don't Five Eyes monitor anyone." It's actually the private sector that does all of the nasty surveillance and everything. We don't know how they started that thing up, but don't worry, we'll take care of them and we'll regulate them. And meanwhile, they cut in their deal to actually add in a few more chips of worth of data stuff. There is a lot of lack of perspective here on the historical part. I just feel like I need to call it out because the journalists writing these articles rarely bring in the prior ones. Anyway, sorry, just throwing that out.
Yeah, the letter from the FCC to the carriers, is to the 15 biggest carriers in the US, asks for details regarding how data retention policies are disclosed to subscribers. So not only what are you doing, but how do you communicate that to your users, which you don't, or you do it in 3-point font. Data deletion policies, and whether subscribers can opt out of the data retention. Obviously not, or bury it.
Maybe they should ask the U.S. Secret Service because they definitely know about data deletion and retention.
So the next big one is that the SEC lists 9 crypto tokens as securities in its insider trading complaint. Against an ex-Coinbase staffer. Whoa. Coinbase
Someone landed in the wrong Discord channel.
Coinbase petitions for rules classifying tokens. We don't want to be doing anything wrong, so please be very clear about classifying these things so that we don't commit any felonies, please, because we didn't mean to.
Question is, can they make more campaign donations than JP Morgan or some of the other classical Wall Street groups? If they can make essentially enough re-election campaigns and they have enough Ted Cruz's in the world, Jared Pole's, etc., then it's like, yay, it's here to stay. You can pay your taxes in Bitcoin. As soon as you get to that status, then this stuff is around forever. But up until that point, it's like, well, it's just negotiations and opening for that.
So the next one is the U.S. Department of Justice arrests a former Coinbase product manager for allegedly leaking insider info about tokens before they were listed. Well, that's the same person, and that's what he did. That's the origin story of the insider trading. That dude's going to get locked up. Next, from Politico, nearly 200 U.S. rural telephone carriers are saddled with old Huawei and ZTE gear they can't afford to remove. Promised Congress funds are coming too slow and aren't enough.
Yeah, that was like 3 years ago. 4 years ago that they said they're going to pay for all that, and they're like going, yeah, when we get around to it.
I think it's because they're in really small towns and whatever. But the next story says Apple, according to Bloomberg, Apple is on track for its biggest year of U.S. lobbying, spending $4.6 million in the first half of 2022 as Tim Cook becomes one of the country's most politically active tech CEOs.
Now, the real question isn't how much they paid in the active lobbying things. It's how many revolving door of the lawyers that are currently in government are going to get jobs and chief legal counsels at Apple or at the law firms that they retain and hire essentially in the future. Just one of those positions, Ken Salazar, I'm calling him out as an example. So he was a part of essentially the Interior Department of Interior during the British petroleum spill, in the Gulf of Mexico, wiped out whole ecosystems, etc. One of the largest, why billions of dollars worth of value, etc. But surprisingly, they didn't actually had a pretty light slap on the wrist fines for it. It got off pretty well. After office, he went and got a job at the law firm that BP hired for the entire thing, and he's a partner at the thing, making a few million per year. So when you see them say we spend this much on lobbyists, that's the front side part. The backside part is you hire the people after they leave office, and that is a lot larger dollar figure. And they don't call that one out as much. And I think that they should, because it becomes a really big thing. It'd be really important to see for essentially any of the government regulators that are doing this, put a mark on them in the nice little auto reminder tag. What are they doing 4 or 5 years from now? If they start showing up the same law firms that Apple's hiring, it's time to call bullshit on this. But the fact is, we already know that's occurring. It's just people aren't calling it out. We should really get more granular about these things.
One of the tweets that's coming up after the big headlines today is related to this that Saudamini found, and here it is, a preview of tweets to come. Huawei said to be under probe in the U.S. over claims of capturing sensitive data. Huawei has long been dogged by the U.S. government allegations it could spy on the U.S. consumers and customers, while the Chinese company denies the allegations. So I just tweeted that to the Tech News Twitter account at TNATW, so you can get into that for yourself. The short answer is obviously they're doing that. The next big story is a look at Meta's $150 million Meta Immersive Learning Project, through which it has partnered with Iowa-based VR startup called Victory XR to create 10 metaversities. Oh, what a genius term that is. It's not a university, it's a metaversity. Metaversity. Something tells me we're going to be hearing that word more often. That just has a really nice ring to it.
Oh, God,
The
no.
Finland-based company, which is building on-premises quantum computers for supercomputer data centers and research labs, raises $128 million. Instagram-based thrift stores in India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan and Nepal are making used clothes popular again, even desirable among young shoppers. Take note. Instagram-based shops. Why is that important? It's insanely important. Here's why.
Most
Because,
of the world's fabrics come from that region.
well, that too. But the idea that Facebook, prior to Facebook, there were blogs, there were websites. People had websites.
All the
If
things we lost.
if they knew how to build one, it was not trivial. You had to be a bit of a geek to figure out how to set it up.
It took an afternoon entirely to put the little counter at the bottom of your page saying 30 people have visited this site.
Oh my god, I forgot about the counter.
Do you remember the under construction gifs and the garish colors and the GeoCities? I remember it like it was yesteryear.
So Facebook came along and figured out a way to make that super slick and simple so that really stupid people could have a website too. Like really stupid. Like everybody. Like all, billions of people. And in doing so, change the world as we know it. Now, if you want to have a store online today, it's still relatively a bit difficult. Just like having a website for yourself used to be a bit friction. Have a bit of friction. And so now we're right at this critical moment where making a shop will be just as simple as making a social media profile. And that means every stupid person you've ever met can have a shop in minutes and sell stuff. And it's going to be crazy. And they're going to be able to live stream and do all that. You'll see in a minute. They're one of the upcoming headlines. So Instagram-based thrift stores in South Asia are making used clothes popular, even trendy. So there you go. Numerous Instagram-based thrift stores have emerged across India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Nepal over the last 3 years, making the concept of secondhand fashion popular and desirable among young shoppers. These thrift stores have become a lucrative business for many young entrepreneurs. One Indian thrift store owner says that if a dress sells for $10, the profit margin could be as much as $6. So they're doubling the price because you're 10xing or 100xing or 1000xing the audience, the potential buyers. And by the way, this is not just random buyers, because when this is done correctly, it becomes the algorithm targets it for you. So that, think of TikTok for a second. If I'm posting content about used clothing or vintage clothing, they're going to send that to people who are interested in vintage clothing, more or less for free. You used to have to pay for that. That was what ads were about. So you are reaching potentially hundreds of thousands of people for free. So you can imagine you can charge double what the little store on the corner is charging, who has access to relatively small number of people, hundreds of people. So yeah, when things go online in this way with the algorithms, with everything, social shopping's gonna be redonkulous. And this is a good example of what's to come. And they profile these, South Asian entrepreneurs who simply put shit on Instagram. Simple as that. So, they're going to have the payment mechanism really simple between them, and they do. And it's all over Asia, and it's coming this way, and get ready. So, by the way, we were just talking about why Instagram today announced they're going to copy TikTok. And now you know why. Because when you are sharing vintage clothing posts, you want it seen by everybody who might be interested in that, because this is good. This is part of the necessary change required to enable social commerce. Because social commerce won't work if it's only being seen by the 50 soft-headed friends that you have who aren't really interested in your vintage clothing. You need it to be seen by tens of thousands of people that you've never met and will never meet and aren't following you and that you don't follow, who are interested in the shit that you're posting. So that's what commerce is about. This is why TikTok is in a position to literally kill Facebook. And Facebook knows it. So Facebook has no choice but to adopt these models because of the payment layer that's coming in and the social shopping layer that's coming in. Now it all makes sense. So, watch what happens. In just a minute, I'm going to... here it is. I'll just jump right to it. 3 stories later. Whatnot is the name of the startup. A live streaming shopping service for buying and selling collectibles has raised $260 million at a $3.7 billion valuation, up from $1.5 billion a year ago. Called Whatnot. I've never even heard of it. Whatnot's valuation doubles to $3.7 billion as live streaming shopping gains popularity in the U.S. Let's pin that one to the top of the room for the lazy kids in the back. Here we go. I'm going to pin that for you. Here comes the live stream shopping. Here comes Facebook making radical changes to their platform to embrace this new reality that we will soon be living in. And wait until we get into the goddamn metaverse with this shit. That's when it's going to get real crazy. Anywho, I don't know why the link at the top of the page didn't refresh, but oh, it did. There it is. Yeah, there you go.
Yes, it is. What's
Okay.
not right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Whatnot.
Tyler, I have one comment on this as well. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so also, I don't know if anyone's ever heard of the company. I haven't. I've been in marketing ops for like 20 years, called Ben. It's Branded Entertainment Group. Bill Gates started it years ago, and their core belief, what they're going after, is strictly influencer marketing. So there's a lot of companies backed by big names in tech that are going after all of this stuff, but a lot of it's in the back. It's not something you're going to hear about. And I actually just turned down a job with them because I know nothing about the space. I don't want to deal with the likes of Britney Spears, and because they're using, all these people to, basically push their products. And you're absolutely correct. The spin now is no longer you have some creative agency, which, by the way, that's where I work now, is a creative agency. but in the biotech space. It's going to go away from that, and it's going to be more people and influencer. And I mean, it's going to switch gears pretty quickly. So there's, to your point, like you said, who's heard of that company? I never heard, maybe you guys have heard of it. I've never heard of Ben, Branded Entertainment Group. But I'll tell you right now, these companies are doing a lot in the back. So these companies are going to start, I think, pushing to the forefront. But I think it's an interesting discussion because it's something myself as a techie too. I'm not on board. I don't know that I'm going to run to TikTok. I don't even have a TikTok. So I don't think it's going to be everybody, but I think they might force our hand, like other technologies that we're going to have to get on board at some point. So, but I think it's very interesting to see how this stuff pans out.
Hold on, you don't have a TikTok?
Nope.
Could have sworn I saw you twerking in a TikTok video, but that could have been a deep fake.
I know. That's why I don't even care if people steal things now. Anybody can make a deep fake of any of us. I mean, come on. At this point, chalk it up,
Like now the question is, was it any good? Do I need to be associated with it? Because sometimes if it's
I'll claim
already
it.
out there.
I would claim that twerk. Go ahead. Pin that
Yeah,
on
I
me.
mean that's kind of how it's going to turn into, right? I'll claim it. I mean, if they're able to make money off it, we might claim it.
Good call.
Next up, Class Dojo, a school communication app, raises $125 million at $1 billion valuation. Twitch rolls out new moderator tools, including letting channels swap banning lists with up to 30 other channels to collaborate on locking disruptive users out. Now, I've raised this question once before. I'm going to raise it again because I love this question. Should not companies, brick and mortar companies, do the same? Should Starwood Hotels, which already has a rather big list of their own internal user customer data, and Uber, which has scores for everybody, compare notes? And could you get a discount at a Starwood Hotel if you have a very high score as an Uber driver? I, as a hotel owner myself, would love to see people's Uber scores while they're trying to book. And I would give discounts to people who have really good Uber scores. And I would refuse people who have really bad Uber rider scores. And I might share my data back with Uber about the guests. I might start scoring my guests and start giving them that. And Airbnb has all kinds of feedback about guests. And there's a whole bunch of companies have internal siloed data. Why can't we start all sharing that data? And should we? And how do you feel about that?
I feel good when I have a great rating.
Right.
But
By the
but no, it makes all the sense in the world eventually. But it's also kind of getting close indirectly to what China's doing about rating people. If we start taking all these different ratings, now granted, theirs is more top down, but think about all the different things and different places we're rated, and if those come to a master number, whether it is Uber, credit cards, credit rating, and you end up walking with a live number, whoa, that'd be interesting.
Human behavior will improve overall. People will start behaving politely, nicely, and courteously since they know they'll be rated, so they'll be politely shutting the Uber doors rather than banging them when they leave the cab. So I guess to Robert's point, it's a good thing because then you know someone's watching you, rating you. You'll be conscious of your behavior.
So now I have to ask another question since you brought that up. Is is it good that well wait, what does that say about our character when we tend to act good when we know that we're being rated and watched?
Everyone who uses Airbnb knows exactly that, and so do Uber riders for the most part. Know that the driver rates them, and that rating affects how quickly they might get picked up because at the rate the drivers can see is who's the Uber driver in Austin that joins us every day there? David. David, aren't you able as a driver to be able to see the passenger's Uber score uh, before you pick them up?
He's not here.
Who's here 2 seconds?
He's down there. He's down there. You need to bring
I
him
invited
up.
him. I invited him up.
Hey guys, sorry, I said in the chat earlier I was playing volleyball, but listening, so I heard the question. Absolutely. Up until February this year, you'd only got to see their score and how far away they were. You didn't know where you were going or how much. Now they've added where you're going and how much. So that's it has allowed them to do some other things, but I won't
And
get too deep into it.
and what goes through your mind when you're contemplating a pickup with regard to their score?
Well, ahead of that, they pushed a feature that allows me to select a rating level and higher to only get requests from.
Aha! So if somebody drops below
So I
your
keep it at 4.8 and above almost always, but I'll
oh
take
wow,
luxury trips because a lot of New Yorkers have lower scores. We talked about this a long time ago, but there's some reasons to pick them up. But I want to get paid for the shittier score, and the only way to do that is to not be available on X, lower the rating I'm willing for, but I get less trips. It's all opportunity cost and sunk cost neuroscience stuff. Get Cameron to talk about it.
so people who have less than a 4.8 might find it harder to get a ride, or have less rides available, and it will take them longer to find one.
Yeah, for sure. But what you can do if you're the user that wants to improve your score, tell people you're going to tip, use cash if available, because then they know that, because the driver doesn't get a signal on whether they tip at all. You get after the ride, maybe 5 minutes later, you get notified if there was a tip.
Uh-huh.
It's part of the way they anonymize it so they don't get feedback into the people cheating scores.
Right. Super interesting.
But actually, this kind of system has existed for a long time. For example, like old time, this online auction site, eBay things. If you're a seller, you can choose not to sell those with negative, points. So online commercials have adapted this system for a long time. Yeah, but in Uber, it's just most of the time you don't see the ratings directly from uh, a specific user, so you can see it. In our local system, it's you like your name Tyler, either with like a T, then buzz, then what they are. So it's semi anonymous. I think that's better system that both sides don't know the specific user given the race, but it's a good way to encourage people to do positive and great with greater behavior. But the problem is also the same. We read the news about how Amazon uh, wanted the Facebook group to stop those face review because it's so easy to get those both positive reviews and negative reviews with a fake account. Actually, it's not fake account. It's account. We can call it a tricky account because it was created by legit human beings as well. Yeah.
Hey, David, this is Robert. You said something that I didn't know. You said now they added it's rating plus destination. Uh, you can elaborate on that offline with me because I want to understand that. But I have shifted post COVID to only Uber Black because they seem to be way more reliable.
Okay, so next story, shall we? YouTube stops allowing misinformation about safety of abortion procedure and politically and potentially unsafe instructions about how to self-induce an abortion.
Wow.
Okay, Google Pixel 6a is being reviewed by The Verge, and they say it has a good camera, a flagship class sensor chip performance, but a slow fingerprint sensor, and the 6.1-inch screen only has a 60 hertz refresh rate. And Amazon plans to acquire primary healthcare provider One Medical, which was the top story yesterday, which means we've now exhausted the top stories for today. Yes, we have. Okay, cool. So now we go into, as we do, the tweets. Does anyone have a tweet.
Yeah, it's getting tougher and tougher.
But Sharon, I think Sharon's talking to somebody else. Okay, so the first tweet I have for today is from Saudamini that 71 cities and towns are paying tech workers to abandon Silicon Valley, and it's working. Incentives are drawing high-paid tech workers and challenging how we think about local economic development because comp- municipalities used to pay and negotiate for companies. So Tesla is a great example. When Tesla says we want to open a new factory, Amazon's another great example. Where when they wanted to open a new HQ, they had multiple cities begging and bidding to do whatever's necessary to get Tesla to open the new factory in Austin, for example. Austin had to compete with Oklahoma, Tulsa, I recall. Nevada ended up winning the bid for the first gigafactory, but there were several others in play. And now we're starting to see cities negotiate an offer for tech talent who is going to now work remote. And if you were the mayor of a small town, might you do the same for these very high earning individuals, very savvy, intelligent remote workers? And indeed, Bali is jumping all over that train, and Thailand is to some extent. Um, Digital nomad visas are a thing, but interesting to see American cities are starting to offer tax breaks and stuff. But if you're an American being paid in the U.S., you could live outside the U.S. and save $100,000 off of your tax bill right away, which is about $100 a day at a 35% rate. So why not do that? I'm really confused why people don't do that. It's a very big world. Um, you could lower your cost of living substantially and save $100,000 off your tax bill by simply living anywhere outside of the U.S. So next up is what did we have here? California to allow cryptocurrency campaign donations. California was one of 9 states that had prohibited cryptocurrency contributions, but now they will. Amazon looking to expand satellite internet project, which they call Kuiper internally, and they're expanding to India. Compete with Elon Musk guy and his Starlink. China's Xi calls Biden to wish him a speedy recovery from COVID.
Yeah, just 2 days after Biden.
Very nice of him.
But Biden actually said himself that President Xi and him is gonna have a call within 10 days. So it's quick, just 2 days. So that's a reason why Xi called Mr. President.
Speaking of China, Valerie found one from Bloomberg that China is preparing to intervene to halt soaring polysilicon prices, which have suppressed demand for solar panels. And Amazon is rolling out electric delivery vans in the United States just in time for the new normal of high gasoline prices. Also, who is it?
On the polysilicon stuff, and anything to do with the slave solar joy that also Biden essentially said they would look into the supply chain for, and they're saying, oh no, they come from Xinjiang region, and that's terrible, and we'll have to essentially cancel a bunch of solar projects about that. And then Biden's like, how am I going to meet my inflation goals or my energy targets or my environmental stuff? And so he's like, let's not look into that for the next 3 years at least, and then magically those projects are back online. Yeah, that's one way that prices could come down.
Hey,
On
Tyler,
the
you were talking about the Amazon solar vehicles.
Yes. Not no,
Okay,
not solar, just electric.
electric. Okay, electric.
Electric vehicle.
What surprises me about that, because that to me that's mostly PR, and I hate it when these things get so much press because they outsource majority. of their delivery business. So this, unless they plan on taking a lot of this stuff in house, this is just a nice little spin of an article because it's not going to do much.
Yeah, there's Neuro also, right? That's launching, I think, at the end of this
Sharon, your
year
audio is a
or
little
beginning of
strange.
next, and they
Matrix.
partnered with, I want
Sharon, we can't
Sharing
hear
say,
you.
slow motion.
Sharon, you're in the matrix, so we'll circle back to you. So the next one that I have is from PT Yoder.
oh,
No,
Sharon,
not yet.
you're still there.
Nope, nope.
The new Google Wallet app is available
is
to
it,
all users.
sorry,
Give it some time. The new Google Wallet is now available to all users. Google's went down in a blaze of glory last time with the Google Wallet team, and they couldn't let that opportunity die. Now, could they? That was just too good of an opportunity to not give that one a second crack. So it's back. The new Google Wallet. All that data is just way too valuable. They just gotta have it. The next is from Pat from South China Morning Post that China requires influencers online to have qualifications to talk online about law or medicine. I kind of like that. I kind of like that.
Yes.
I'm okay with that. I'm
Wow,
good
I
with that.
love that. Finally, we need experts to talk about expert things.
You could
Psychiatry, psychology, medicine,
you could now
Exactly.
law.
We don't need unqualified coach all around the place.
you could get
Yeah.
the blue check if you're verified, and then you get the uh, what kind of logo, what kind of icon would you use for the law if you are qualified to speak about
You mean in
law or
China?
qualified to speak about medicine? No, I'm just saying, wouldn't that be handy so that you could see who's qualified to talk about stuff as a form of little icons that are kind of earned little badges?
I mean, I could just imagine all the economists, like, in 2006, 2007, if we had had this, it'd been great. They're going to say, it's like, wow, the economy is never going to crash. Housing prices are always going to go up. They'd have all sorts of official things in that. Same things for the folks that are saying, hey, our national defense policy is well crafted. We don't have to worry about anything about large disasters or anything. I'm sure essentially 4 years ago, they'd say essentially all sorts of things. The supply chain experts, the people that advise on, whether or not we essentially have a resilient supply chain, they'd have very official check marks next to all their things because they'd be experts in it. And what could possibly be wrong with essentially having a bunch of
You know
qualified
what?
experts advising on everything?
There's an alternative approach that I would employ in my own universe, which is just a straight up intelligence test score, just a real general IQ score. Just put the IQ
And
number
that's called eugenics.
right next to the person's face, so I can see if you're an idiot and if you don't know what number comes next in the string of numbers. So, anyway, interesting idea there. And of course, Chris brings up a great point, which is I imagine they're not going to allow you to talk about finance unless your views are very simpatico with the CCP's views on finance. So now they found a new way to make sure you're shutting up if your views aren't uh, in line with the government. That's kind of
Well,
genius.
Chris also brings up a good point too, because take your idiot score, Tyler. A lot of those agencies that he mentioned, none of them would, in essence, the individuals there would show up with an idiot score, but as a collective, their outcome turned out to be idiocracy.
That
IQ tests measure one and only one thing, and they're very good at that one thing. They measure your ability to take IQ tests. The ability to generalize across entire other things is as it's a long topic. We can go into those in depth, but it is not held up in the way that they've promised.
Well, look at Moody's. Did Moody's call the last financial crisis? You know, those ratings organizations? No, they didn't.
the moment you start measuring something, the ability for it to actually be useful in the real world actually starts to become degraded, because now there is now a target for bad faith actors to manipulate the social signals that they're using to manipulate the target so that it makes more favorable ratings, often essentially in perverse incentives against the thing you're actually trying to measure. And this is one of the challenges for a lot of the philosophies built on systems theory and a lot of the governance things built in the 1980s, when they're saying let's replace everything with measure everything. You can't manage what you can't measure, etc. It's just human beings don't operate like that. Biological systems do not operate like that. People don't work like that. But it makes for really great spreadsheets and makes for fun management things. It just works right up into the point that it doesn't. And at that point, if everyone's using the same management methodologies, you would just have everything break down all at once. It's quite spectacular and consistent.
And what those regulations that China put out post the lipstick influencer scenario in June, these regulations that banned a whole lot of things, including these qualified people needing to have qualifications to speak. Also, the fact that it was very clear about saying that if you are going to say anything, if it's against Communist policy, the CCP's policy, anything like that, you're not allowed to say it. It's banned. So anything, including a little cake that looks like a tank, is banned and puts you in deep doo-doos. Thanks very much.
Oh, what happened to the lipstick king, by the way?
No information.
All right,
No
Pat. I've
more
heard of deep
lipstick.
doo doo, but not deep doo doo.
Disappeared.
That's a new one.
In
Well,
fact,
Doo-doo
It's
is a
interesting.
new word.
it's interesting, Chris's statement about everything works until it doesn't, because that's exactly how innate cognitive bias works. Not learned cognitive bias, but innate cognitive bias is based upon evolutionary selection for statistically generally correct assumptions, and they work until there's a novel disruption in whatever data substrate you're operating on. So the failure um, at scale, when there's novel inputs into a particular domain, is almost a direct consequence of the DNA coding of cognitive bias that has emerged out of evolutionary biology.
Okay, so Joe Williams sends in one that Netflix CEO predicts that regular linear TV, non-streaming, the downfall within the next decade.
Oh God, please boost my revenues. I make the prayer to the markets every day when I say these press headlines. I feel like this is like the incantation prayer of a CEO, because they're asking for one of their main competitors to go away.
Okay, next up, COVID-19 pregnancy linked to delays in babies reaching milestones. In a small study, babies
Uh-oh.
born to women who caught COVID while pregnant had a 6% chance of development delay diagnosis by 1 year of age. Take it away,
Holy
John.
Wait,
shit.
raise your hand if you're shocked. Raise your hand if you don't believe that they'll even have congenital issues. Raise your hand if you don't believe that they'll have cardiac issues. Raise your hand if you think that any of the symptomatic issues we've seen present in people who contracted the disease could not be transferred to the fetus at delivery stage during an infection. Who didn't foresee this? I'd love to hear you though, John, because I know you got a lot to say about this one.
Yeah, congenital diseases is one thing, but delaying the cognitive abilities, even in young children. I mean, the huge research studies prove that COVID, despite of all the other side effects, it
Down boy.
reduces. Oh my God, that's my puppy. It reduces. And his name is Einstein, and he's trying to continue.
Hey, we got a commentary by Einstein.
That's so I'll let perhaps John finish this, but the reduction in cognitive capabilities was, very evident in many studies. Adults, young children, even adolescents, and it reduces a level of cognition, IQ level, and the growth, like in children, was also altered. So, that means that we are. Uh, well, becoming stupid if you are getting COVID.
And reinfection rate.
Thank
So we
you.
have
Every
cumulative
infection.
infectious brain damage. That should be terrifying. Also, the numbers looking at near like universal infection at some point in some regions or globally. I don't know. It depends essentially what kind of protocols they're looking at. Maybe we all go zero COVID like China. But ostensibly, what's crazy about that 6% is a shockingly huge number of people that you have permanent potential medical issues with. Even if it's only a very slight amount of damage, the sheer number of people affected by that is astounding. And it might be cumulative. We don't know. That this is that's crazy.
Okay, so I guess John didn't comment on this one. I was hoping John would comment on that. The next,
Sorry, I was on another
I
call.
was waiting for John
I
to say, mask yourself and protect your brain.
Yeah, John.
well, sorry, I was on another call. What was the issue?
So
the
we're now seeing,
Decline associated with COVID infection.
that's
Decline
And
in
everything,
what?
brother. Go.
pregnancy.
no
Decline in pregnancy?
COVID
No, the
19
test and
pregnancy
afterwards,
linked to delays in babies reaching key milestones.
Yeah,
Developmental delays is the issue. Developmental delays in babies where the mother had COVID-19.
yeah. I could propose five different hypotheses as to why that's true. I think that it's worrisome. Um, my top hypothesis would be that parents are stressed to the max, and the developmental milestones conform to parental competence and attention and capacity. That would be my number one hypothesis. But we need data. That's I mean there's many other things you could speculate, but my guess is that's the main one, and it'll probably take a year or two to disambiguate what the real cause is.
Hmm. Well, it adds a little more fuel to the fire as to why China is so obsessed with making sure, the whole COVID zero policy that they have over there.
Retaining intelligence is important to them.
hmm
It's a huge gamble. They're bankrupting their economy on their short term. They're trading their growth targets, and that's heavily leveraged. But they're going. We think the damage for COVID might be worse, so we'll see. They're taking a gamble. We'll see if it pays off.
Yeah.
Hey, what if everyone becomes them and they're the only brains in the world? Then they can run it. I guess it's a great gamble. If not, I guess they lose their manufacturing edge in the entire economic schema.
I mean, it's a gamble.
So Evan found one from the Register, which the headline reads: "The United States Fed probes Huawei over missile silo spying. Spying allegations around Chinese comms giant refuse to go away." And Pat
Just
found one. Yeah.
quick thing about the missile silos.
Hmm?
Missile silos aren't designed to launch. That's something a lot of people misunderstand what missile silos are. Missile silos are designed as something called the nuclear sponge. They're designed to be targets. They're designed to essentially be the first things wiped out in a mass nuclear war, and they're not expected to have the launch capability to launch again. Now, they do add second strike capability. They do add those in, but that's a bonus. The main value of it is that that's a nuke that wasn't spent on a city with civilians in it. It was a cornfield in the middle of Montana. But when they're talking about monitoring them, yeah, getting a few extra seconds of hey, is the thing going through maintenance or so, might give you an edge. So that's one of those factors. But yeah, just as a little side though, missile silos are not designed; they're designed as targets.
Okay.
You're on form today, Chris.
Yes.
Are we ready for the next one? Here we go. Pat found one from Radio Free Asia, which is committed to not being censored in Asia. They're based in Hong Kong. Anyway, Hong Kong government plans new law banning computer data deemed harmful to the state. I assume the law will apply anywhere in the world. So even
There's
beyond Hong
some
Kong.
children's drawings that might have some extreme worrisome problems in the future.
But
And
there was
maybe
some,
essentially we've got the
there,
open AI generating new children's drawings that might be essentially damaging to the state. We're gonna have some serious problems in the near future about this.
since the article says the law will apply anywhere in the world and could usher in a great firewall of China-style censorship. And here comes Hong Kong into China's internet, basically. They're going to start controlling data that seems harmful in the Hong Kong government. Well, that's anything that disagrees with the CCP, isn't it? Well, that's what the whole point of the Great Firewall of China was about. So, as predicted by some handsome tech bro in here about a year ago, that Hong Kong would be the first place that becomes part of China's internet. And by the way, it's conceivable, and this is why ZTE and Huawei's 5G antennas and all that's so interesting, uh, because it gives a glimpse as to which other countries might become part of China's internet, like Myanmar, Burma, who have just set up a whole bunch of face tracking cameras everywhere, who also want to silence and control things. There's several governments, the authoritarian governments, like Russia. Some could argue Turkey to a lesser degree, or even Hungary to an even lesser degree. And North Korea certainly fits the bill.
Are
Uh,
these groups willing to give up sovereignty in order to gain those nice fancy tools?
hmm. Hmm. Some. I'm sure
It's
it's.
who are you giving sovereignty to? Is
The
it you
groups that
want it to
control your
China or
data.
to America?
Well, America essentially we've got issues as well. I mean, it's not a universal check the box and then it's you've got everything handed over. But yeah, we definitely have some powers with that.
I
Hmm.
say better the devil that you know.
It'd be nice if we could just make our own tools and chips and we have to rely on giant conglomerates that are sold out to different spy agencies or different, authoritarian governments. It'd be nice if it was just like, go to yield, like, you have like the boot maker and the candlestick maker. And, you got the guy that essentially makes, some nice happy, hangers for your clothes out of wood, It'd be nice if we had that same sort of thing, but for advanced chip manufacturing. All the chemicals fit in like a garage size kind of thing. You just have like your nice little chemical packs like for like they have for printer ink, and it just makes chips for your community all day long. I mean, that'd be wonderful. Why the hell did we don't we try to research those instead of hyper optimized $12 billion factories that we have to essentially rely on decade long commitments from government? I mean, I think Samsung was up for $200 billion worth of chip fabrication plants. It's like I feel like if you're going to be talking for $250 billion, I'm sure some really smart people could figure out how to make a smaller community version that doesn't require so much bullshit around it. But anyways, that's just a side note. But it'd be great if we could look more into the essentially decentralized semiconductor manufacturing. I think it'd do a good thing for human rights.
Okay.
I agree, but on the other hand, back in time when everything was so nuclear and like a microcosmos, we had more wars because there was no real economic interest or no real interest in collaborating so much around the world. So on one hand, it would be nice for us, but on the other hand, this huge economic infrastructure and dependence on each other also protect us from major wars, I think.
Okay. Moving right along. Um, the next one is that TikTok's retirement house, and that is what you think it is. It's a retirement home based on TikTok, where the people living in the retirement home, your grandparents, are the influencers.
Oh, I thought
And
it was the people that worked at TikTok. That'd be even more entertaining.
TikTok's retirement house shows you're never too old to be an influencer. The actors behind Retirement House know you're laughing at them because they're older people doing youthful things. They're just happy you're laughing.
You were talking about something yesterday, Tyler, and I was thinking about this article. I just didn't know how to sort of reference it in terms of social media. And I thought it was, I wish I could remember what it was that you were referencing.
Okay. The next one's from BB from the South China Morning Post that a Chinese team tracks beavers with AI.
The
And by the
important.
way, if you look at that article and you scroll down a little bit, there's this wonderful picture about how they have armed guards for the beavers. Now, if you look at this and you think of the search terms for this, armed guards, beavers tracked with AI that has target recognition and everything and computer vision, and it just so happens to be in the Xinjiang region. It's amazing how that works out. Where all the Uyghur genocide stuff working with those same computer vision, hit vision suppliers and everything. But this is for a totally legitimate purpose. This is just for the beavers. So, the beavers are adorable. I like having all the search terms that I've searched for essentially human rights violations, and it turns up adorable beavers now. It's beautiful. I love those beavers.
Because this is set in Xinjiang, so I'm a little bit negative about this because like might use this beavers to train the AI with um, disguise things. So, but yes, it's great to try to preserve wild animals with AI because it's hard to capture those videos on time and live. So actually, they need to filter maybe just a few thousand, hundred of pictures within 30,000 pictures per month. So, but the sensitive part is this is employed in Xinjiang. But yeah, both the positive side and negative side.
Okay, next up, Kyle Jenner and Travis Scott, that's one of the Kardashians, basically, and her partner, are labeled climate criminals after posting photos of private jets.
They're gonna have to up their advertising budgets with some tabloids to make up for this.
This is actually based on, I guess there's a Twitter account that tracks a celebrity use of private planes. And when actually looking at how often or where they're flying, one, if you look at the article, it says one such flight was as short as 3 minutes long to get through LA traffic.
Okay, this is kind of ridiculous. They just all this means is they just need to spend $2 million on a biofuel company. They're done now. Essentially, it's carbon neutral and it's not polluting anymore because all the energy that goes into it is just goes to a micro that burns in the engine. But these things on like knee jerk responses because they're trying to adjust other things like policy for the entire airline industry, which is fine. It's just blaming that as just you just have a climate criminal just because you fly in a jet. It just means no. It just means they need to put some of their fortune to actually resolving the thing that they're doing. It's not that hard to do carbon neutral with airlines. It just takes essentially biofuels.
Okay, next up, um, Jeff G found an article which appears to be based on a video footage of CIA Director William Burns claiming or admitting that there's no such thing as Havana syndrome.
Dun dun dun.
However, this is a one-off article, and he can't find any other articles to. But there is a YouTube. The article has a YouTube video that I'm going to play right now, and there's actually a transcription. And here I'll just read it, where he's being interviewed, and the person asks him, "I want to ask you about something that has been going on for 6 years." And that is what the government calls anomalous health incidents, and which is commonly known as Havana syndrome. And he says, William Burns, the boss of the CIA, says, "I think we know more, but let's start at least the beginning of my tenure as director of CIA. I know I've learned over many years of public service that any leader has no more profound obligation to take care of their people, so I was determined from the start to build on efforts that were ongoing to make clear to our officers and their families that they were going to get the care they needed and that they deserved. And my very first day on the job, I started meeting with the officers who had been affected by these anomalous health incidents, and you can't meet with individuals who have suffered through this and not take very seriously what they've experienced, whatever the cause turns out to be. So I think we've made significant progress in ensuring people get the care they need and deserve." Anyway, it's a very long response. I've only read the first part of it.
That reminds me a little bit of North Korea. Hey, what about your concentration camps? Yeah, we don't call them that, so we don't have that problem. But all joking aside, I think the late Chris talked about how this was, potentially technology related to microwave ablation. So it's not something that's so ludicrous as to be impossible. It's just to what extent, and it may turn out to be a very nonlinear problem, maybe very gene specific or health specific. So it's really hard to say. But there are a few programs within the government and Department of Defense that do study these kinds of problems.
He
I can
says,
tell
don't
you they were actively researching on the USA side, so whether or not some other governments were, it's like, well, we don't know. The last records I saw from the research side dipped off from the late 80s, essentially early 90s. If anyone knows more recent papers, I'd love to see them. But yeah, they're doing all sorts of funky stuff.
Yeah, like I think one of the rumors was in 1975 in Moscow, the American embassy, some of the ambassadors were starting to feel weird in a similar fashion to this. And it turned out that somebody was pointing a microwave generator at the embassy next door, or the building next door to the embassy, rather. So, those kinds of things sometimes precipitate or cause these research programs to develop. And I'm reminded of that movie, Men Who Stare at Goats kind of thing. So, it's all cloak and dagger,
A
Tinker
lot of the
Tailor
men that
Soldier Spy.
a lot of the men that start goat stuff was basically are saying, "Wow, these are weird. They're doing psychos. They're doing like some sort of like psionic brainwave things, and pay for some person to stare at a thing and say, yes, the psychic says we should go investigate this with a Stargate program or whatever." But they did some wacky things. But what's interesting is you actually look between the lines. You actually look at the things that actually got funded, the actual activities that were resourced, and the sorts of chemical parts that were used, etc. You realize this is actually torture research, and they were branding it essentially with, "Oh, here's some silly thing," as one of their like just make it look more palpable to the public. And they made some dark stuff there. Like it's not ethical, the work they were doing there. What's interesting, when I looked at this specifically, I actually found a memo from Clinton not too long after. I'm trying to think, it was either like second year he's in or just after he's in, but he actually is a presidential judgmental. It's on the public record, calling essentially for an end to any research that has unethical human experimentation with microwaves. And this was actually like a specific directorate from the president of things in public record saying that essentially, well, we might have been doing something in the past, but we're not going to do it anymore. And the thing is that regardless of whether or not the USA government continued with that research, just the fact that it exists and that it can cause brain damage at a distance, that's not good stuff to have existing in the world. I suspect that it's not that hard to develop the technology. Tuning it is a little bit more challenging, and even if you have something that's not very well tuned, you can still cause a lot of damage with it. So it makes me sad to see these things happen. I wish there was more public information on it, not just essentially, it'd be great if we didn't have to have spooks essentially telling us, the current progress on these things. It'd be great if we had more of the scientists that worked on these things that actually describe what they did and what they learned and what the side effects were.
Yeah,
But you,
sorry, go
the
ahead.
scientists have signed NDA kind of things. They won't be able to talk about that.
This is why Freedom of Information Acts are so important, but why that essentially those are very, very weak. Honestly, we need to essentially reevaluate our relationship with secrecy. It's not possible to have a democracy when you have this amount of information that's done in secret. Essentially, de facto, we're run by groups that have access to information versus people that don't. You can't have an informed electorate to run a democracy otherwise. And if we're not
Well,
going to do a democracy, we shouldn't pretend about it. But that's a separate discussion. But yeah.
it's legislative isolation or compartmentalization. So it might be the corporation holds the IP and therefore it would not show up in a freedom of information request. But there are very quickly or immediately there are medical applications because microwave ablation is used to target tumors. So
Sure.
from a military application where you're just causing harm to now focusing this like a scalpel or the point of a laser and being able to treat disease and not just engage in whatever theater of war you may find yourself. I think is a good sign. So I'm always down for medicine making advances. So sometimes, where did nuclear technology come from, and to what extent do we use that now as a wider species, right? So.
There's always a temptation in science to essentially take the unethical route with doing experimentation and such because you can get the results supposedly faster. But the thing is, like, even if you do things in an ethical manner, you can do it essentially doesn't it slow down research down that much. We could slow it down, but I mean, honestly, just having something that actually is done in a public forum makes it also a lot easier for people to essentially go and say, as a society, we're okay with this, or as a society, we're not okay with this, and we can actually have those sorts of those step by step things. The problem is right now is that we have essentially a bifurcation occurring. Anything that happens in public sector, we're essentially told you have to submit 6 months of animal testing paperwork just to essentially have a rat run around in a maze, and then you have to essentially like ask the go through essentially 12 different ethic review boards. So essentially it becomes so impractical that only essentially extremely well groups to actually do very very basic research that honestly wouldn't be that bad essentially to go through it. Meanwhile, on the other side, you have secret military groups that are doing god knows what with essentially human medical research subjects, and essentially without oversight, just essentially going, what people in the world can we disappear? And it's horrifying. And whenever you see essentially some of the stuff leak, it's shocking. They do a pretty good job of covering up, but you can read between the lines and find out where some of the medical studies come from. It's like, what was that researcher working from in that time frame? So we have this bifurcation occurring where essentially you have extremely unethical research going on one side, and then hyper ethical research that's not doing anything on the other. If you ever want to look at something very dark, there's a page on Wikipedia called "Human Experimentation" or "Unethical Human Experimentation" in the United States. One of the darkest pages I've seen on Wikipedia. There are a lot of others, but that's a good start. But the reason why I'm bringing that up is to say there are good ways to do this, but we're not really doing it right now, and I really wish we bring more into alignment.
I mean, I disagree. There's so much research and studies coming out that made, especially this year, huge breakthroughs in treatment of cancers. Like, yesterday we shared that was it 87% of success rate of prostate cancer.
It's
We had
crazy.
another day breast cancer success of clinical study. Like, I think we are having a lot of progress in research. More than ever, we have more publications than ever, and so I don't agree that it's stagnant. And I always are more. I always think I would be more careful of slowing actively down research. We think we have now maybe like morals that maybe are better or not, but just remember how religion slowed down progress for hundreds of years in the Western world.
Thousands of years.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't even know where human life comes from because the church said it can't be women. They are just basically the dirt, and all these moral and implications that we have most of the time slowed down research and made a lot of people suffer for generations and generations that they didn't have to. If all these people wouldn't have been burned and, said they were talking with the devil, we could have saved maybe many more lives from all kinds of diseases that were quite horrible. If you look at records where people went to this holy places from the church to on the hope that a miracle happens. And they have records of that and all kinds of, where Fatima is, where Lourdes is, and, all these different places. You can read those. People died from very simple things and suffered for years. And most of it's due to religion, and they went to religion. And then out of thousands, maybe 70 in 200 years or so were seen as a miracle healing and were actually healed. So our very rational scientific thinking and humanity saves more lives and protects us from suffering more than. And of course there's always some people that kind of misuse it, but the progress and the outcome we have, I think, outweighs those. If just look at records from basic infections, how people suffered for years, and it started affecting the bones and so on. So it's quite horrible.
I agree with Katerina 100%. I'd say from when I began in healthcare in 97 to now, the sort of research that are coming out now are far more complex. And I would definitely say it ties into a lot of the stance that our government took, which were, they would say politically leaning, but it was religiously influenced for sure. Especially when I remember the conversations we had around stem cell use, for example. People were really quoting the Bible as to why we shouldn't leverage stem cells. And also, a little bit on a personal note, I was diagnosed with IBC, which typically has a lifespan of 2 years. Had it not been for the vast amount of research, we wouldn't be having people coming out of treatment saying, I have an additional 12 years that I can fight this thing. And within my lifetime, this could be eradicated. It's exciting for cancer patients. It's exciting for people with autoimmune diseases. It's exciting for those who just don't have a wing and a prayer to depend on. I would urge that we not push against research, but mainly really push for more equitable access to these research. I'm thinking of when my mother had a Weingarten stroke, for example. I was able to put her on a trial drug, but it's really because I leveraged the community of healthcare members that I knew to get her on that list. So we really need to talk about access to some of these research and medicine rather than pushing against it altogether. Thank you, and I land.
Okay.
Well,
There's a,
I really wish
sorry.
technology would finally help the church figure out how many angels are dancing on the head of a pin, because about 1,000 years ago, that helped split the church.
I think
I
one
think there's
thing
a
to.
lot to,
Sorry, go ahead, Pat.
sorry. Sorry, very quickly, as quickly as I can. I think there's a lot to be said about information and misinformation today, as well as back then, 2,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, whenever it was. And at no point has it been not possible to allow science to come into its own. But there is a thought to be had about that it's an evolving process, that over the decades and the centuries, we have evolved in the way how our brain investigates things, develops ideas. And aren't we wonderful that where we are now in the 21st century, that this surge of knowledge is helping us understand a whole lot of stuff with or without the church, with or without politics. And isn't it wonderful that we, the ordinary person, can have this exposure to information if we care to look? And we can create our own thought processes as to what is correct or not, and therefore fight for it. But still, we're hindered. Evolution, I think, is the word I just want to leave you with. The fact that we're evolving in all sorts of ways, but we are evolving.
Okay. Are we ready for the last of the tweets? Here we go. We got about 10 to go. Andreessen Horowitz, one of Silicon Valley's leading firms, certainly one of the very, very top firms, ditches physical headquarters in Silicon Valley in return for global outposts. And it was also, I saw a tweet today that they are setting up a bit of a shop in Miami, which the mayor of Miami tweeted about, welcoming them. And what's this next one? MIT, Katerina shares one that MIT discovers semiconductor that can perform far better than silicon. Well, that would be handy. MIT.
Wait, Tyler,
Yes, I read that.
let's talk about Andreessen Horowitz for a minute because I think that's a bellwether. I think Andreessen Horowitz is a response to a couple of different trends. Number one, the future of work. Number two, the fact that you can work from anywhere.
Mhm.
And number three, the fact that many Web3 deals, which are and biotech deals, are outside Silicon Valley anyway, and even outside the United States anyway. So this has economic consequences for Silicon Valley, for the Bay Area, and who knows who else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they are definitely a big
So it's
principle.
not just nothing.
No, no, it's totally something, and thank you for making the point strongly. Because, by the way, Andreessen Horowitz was probably the most Silicon Valley centric firm, which really drove this ethos that Silicon Valley is the end all be all and all roads lead to Silicon Valley, and if you wanted to raise money, you needed to come there. And Mark, notably, wouldn't go speak at conferences anywhere. He thought, everything needs to come here, and we as Silicon Valley should force everyone to come here. And he uh, was quite adamant about that. And so it's quite interesting to see that the firm that was perhaps most associated with Silicon Valley being the center of gravity for tech is now decentralizing of sorts geographically. So the next one was the MIT discovers a semiconductor that can perform far better than silicon. They found a new material that can perform. The next step is finding practical and economical ways to develop it. And then Saudamini just found one that Russia and Iran discuss broad tech collaboration. Well, of course they are, because Iran's going to be joining the Russian-Chinese alliance, whatever it ends up being called, the axis of authoritarians. And proposed working group would see Moscow Miltech, meaning military tech conglomerate, operate in Tehran. Right. Well, they're going to have to share resources to keep up with the liberal democratic West, or whatever it ends up being called.
It's the new axis of evil, Tyler. Let's be realistic.
The axis of, I'm looking for a word that's not
I
so.
thought it was a BRIC, or that was one of the names of some of the countries that are affiliating with each other. So it's a brick of axis of evil.
So the next one's quite interesting. I had never heard this. Tesla has a dedicated lane at the U.S.-Mexico border crossing. That's unbelievable. I grew up on the border of Mexico in San Diego, which is the busiest border in the world, the busiest border crossing. And it can oftentimes take several hours to cross that border going from Mexico to America. So having your own lane, boy, would that be a dream come true. Holy cow, would that be unbelievable. But
How
it's
How
the
much
how
would
the
you pay
hell
for
did they
the
get
land?
that approved with all the other supply chain stuff we need to get into this country? It's
well,
amazing.
Mexico is a major auto car industry player, and
Bribes.
it was probably a concession in the deal
Mordida.
to make a factory there. If they're going to make like a gigafactory there, well, we need to be able to get in. We would love to do that, but we can't do that because your border is too damn slow. And then they said, but if you give us our own lane to make sure we don't get held up in that traffic, then we could do it. That's how I imagine something like that happened.
Sounds like a solution for the Boring Company.
I'm fascinated how Tesla is solving supply chain related issues and keeping up the production, even the second quarter, producing more than expected, even with the Shanghai factory being closed due to COVID, and how they are also trying to bring in the manufacturing here as opposed to other countries so that in future, all the manufacturing capabilities are up to date, running, and not getting affected by any other global crises.
Now the bed wet from rain.
Yeah, I think one of the advantages that Tesla had was that they designed their own processor or neural accelerator, and therefore, when there were shortages, they could rewrite the software if they wanted to reformulate it. Whereas the other companies are just not necessarily in that position; they're not software centric.
Phil, I got to jump out for the rest of today. Phil,
What's
Phil,
interesting though is that Tesla doesn't have a
Phil.
big presence in Mexico, whereas the other automakers.
Yeah, I'm just hold on one second, Phil. Cheryl, can you take over for? I don't. Although maybe you can't because I have the tweets. But
Yes, I'm here.
yeah, if anyone wants to share tweets, that's cool. I gotta jump out early today. So,
Okay, good.
right, take care.
Uh, Ken, you want
Take
to
care,
share the
Tyler.
article you share? Sorry, who is trying to speak? Go ahead.
No, I was just going
No,
to
Cheryl, I just back channeling you. I didn't realize it was old. Somebody sent it to me this morning. I didn't even
Yeah,
really look at it. Don't worry
that was
about it.
from me.
Skip
No
it.
worries. Okay, who wanted to speak? Sorry, go ahead.
say bye to Tyler. That's all.
Okay, great. Hold on. Let me see where. Where did Tyler stop? Anyone want to share any interesting article first before we go on to the other tweets? No? Okay, hold on. Let me.
Cheryl, I had a question.
Yes, Tina.
So I was just reading a newsletter that I get, and I saw an article from 4 days ago about a company that implanted. What was? Oh, sorry. And I was wondering if we covered it. A brain-computer interface startup implants its first device in a U.S. patient. Did we cover this? Does anybody remember?
Nope.
No. And
Nope. You want to share
it's
about
not
this?
the contact lens, right, Tina?
No, it's not actually. So let me read it really quickly. And I did tweet
Please.
it, and I did tag
Yeah, I
Tech
saw
News.
it. So I
And
retweeted
it's
it just
not
now.
Neuralink.
It's not Neuralink. The company is
It
called Synchron, Synchron. So Synchron's procedure will help an ALS patient text by thinking, in a major step forward in a nascent industry, with the Brooklyn-based company recently overtaking Elon Musk's Neuralink.
Mm.
So I wanted to get everyone's take on this, and if anyone wants to read through it, but I thought it was kind of interesting. This was an article in Bloomberg on July 18th.
Yeah, Tina,
Yeah.
that that same company also has implanted several computer chips in patients in Australia already, according to what I've heard, three or four of them. And I would imagine getting ALS patients to be part of a clinical trial would be, I'm not going to say easy, but easier, because there aren't very many alternatives for them. So yeah, then this and actually the headline I read when this first came out was that they beat, they beat Neuralink despite Elon Musk's, publicity.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it was, I think, publicity focused. I think a lot of neuroscience researchers have been working on these problems for a long time. I think Elon often does a great job of marketing ideas and moving technologies forward. So him joining the race probably helped motivate this company one way or another. So it's nice to see that, it's not just a zero sum, that there's many solutions.
From what I'm reading here, and one of the things that they're doing this the way that similarly to the way that they're actually not cutting into the brain. They're doing it the way that they insert stents for heart therapy. But one of the things that I wanted to get a little more information on, and I don't know if this is something we want to discuss now, but a lot of the things that I've talked to other people in other rooms about is the controversies around putting foreign objects into the body and the possibility of rejection, and how a lot of people feel that this technology won't be adopted necessarily until we can actually manufacture or create something that is more biologically I want to say created, that's not the right word, but something that's more uh, analogous to our own biology than it is like a metal or a foreign object. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. If I can comment on that, and that's sort of an axiom of implants. So, metal implants, as in joint replacements, um, they're not easily infected, but if they do get infected, it's a nightmare. And so, to have an infectious nightmare in the nervous system because of a foreign body inside the nervous system is a problem. And so, what you're describing is there's a couple of things necessary in order to regenerate without putting in foreign objects. So, the first is the stroma, sort of the fibrous architecture of whatever it is you're trying to reconstruct. The second is activating stem cells that may be resident. The third would be importing stem cells. The fourth would be to actually do potentially, and you can use stem cells from that, and you can grow and culture stem cells from that individual and put them back in, but they have to be guided. So, for example, if you're talking about in the nervous system something as simplistic as regenerating the connection of a nerve that's been severed so that it doesn't cause like a phantom limb syndrome, or so that it reconnects with the downstream neurons and reactivates them to rewire the nerve and the brain. These things are all pretty plausible in from animal experiments, and the fact that amphibians can regrow entire arms, legs, tails, and planaria, the flatworm, you can cut their head in half and they'll grow two heads. So there is precedent outside the human species for regeneration of even a brain, with the bisection of the head of a flatworm. And so, to the extent that that biologic capability exists within humans and can be harvested, it should be possible to do all this stuff eventually, and it may take many, many decades to get there through the biologic mechanisms. But in the meantime, if you take just as the example of how many people are paraplegic or quadriplegic as a result of a motorcycle accident or a fall off a cliff or what, pick a insult, and the ability to restore their ability to walk. Is something that could be accessible much earlier with an implant that does incur the risk of infection. And I think if you look at how adversely impacted physically and emotionally and economically, and from a perspective of personal agency, someone with paraplegia or quadriplegia is, would they be willing to take the risk of, say, a 2 in 100 chance of a serious infection in exchange for being able to walk again? And I think the majority of them would say, absolutely, bring it on, while waiting for better solutions downstream. So your comments are all right on the money, and the prospects are good. But if you're the one who's quadriplegic at the moment, your impatience may be appropriately addressed with some of these interim technologies.
Yeah, and on the topic of regeneration, I think some interesting work out of Michael Levin's lab involving electrochemical signals and reactors. They were able to engage those kind of mechanisms not by communicating at the genome level, but at a slightly higher up level, but were able to stimulate that kind of regeneration in organisms that normally are not known for regeneration. So it seems like the library potential is there. It's just a matter of activating it. So for me, it's just a matter of time, I think.
So dealing with a lot
If
of the
they
stuff
are, and if they
coming
are
from
going to use, sorry, just a quick comment. If they are going to use the subdermal approach, like the cardio electro, the SA node replacement, or that kind of approach is very plausible, very, possible even now, because with frequent changes, that kind of electric signal is able to induce the cardiac contraction. So the cardio electrophysiology can be reached from the superficial dermal insertion. So same way, if they are going to, I have not read the article, but if they are using that kind of subdermal approach, it's pretty, very good. It's pretty effective.
So what I would like to do basically from my side of the house, I've been dealing with biomedical hacking for about the past 6 years. Something, the further deeper down that they're going into this process, what are they doing for security controls in place? Because from the stuff I've done with, pacemakers and everything else, it's those that are not in the know, it's kind of shocking the stuff that they put in there. How many of you knew there was a web server inside of your pacemaker? Probably none of you. Okay, they literally have a version of Apache Tomcat sitting there for an admin control to make changes. So, what are the security controls on all these implant devices? Is always my big thing.
Cami?
Oh, yes, thank you. And what a wonderful topic. This is a continuation of, and let me just address Tom's point. I would surmise that a majority of the population are not aware that there's a web server, and that's the first time I heard of it myself. So interesting. And if you're hosting a room on that, I'd love to listen to it. Um, so this Bloomberg article is actually a continuation of Synchron's brain-computer interface clinical trial, and this they're doing in conjunction with Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, and it's called the Command, and it is to evaluate an endovascular brain-computer interface for patients with severe paralysis. And this goes beyond just ALS. If successful, it can also cover those who lost functionality due to epilepsy, brain injury, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and a number of other different conditions. And the brain-computer interface they're not new. This is not new technology. This term was coined by UCLA professor Jacques Vidal back in 1973. You'll also hear it referred to as brain-machine interfaces or direct neural interfaces. And AI machine learning has really helped to accelerate the progress in this field with its pattern recognition and predictive capabilities of the deep learning algorithms, has really helped to decode complex brain recordings at a more rapid pace than human technicians can do or even ever hope to aspire to do. And Synchron itself is a very interesting company. It's privately held and it's headquartered in New York City, and it has offices in Silicon Valley and research facilities in Australia, specifically in Melbourne. And its competitors not only include Elon Musk's Neuralink, but also Brian Johnson's Kernel, Paradromics, Neurable, BlackRock Neurotech, and many, many other companies. It was founded by CEO Thomas Oxley and Nicholas Opie. And what's really interesting is they used their product called Stentrode, and that produced the first chronic brain recording of vascular ECOGs from inside a sheep's blood vessels. And this was published in a paper in Nature Biotechnology. And just 2 years later, this company, Synchron, showed how localized brain stimulation can be achieved via a blood vessel. Let that sink in for a moment. And does not require open brain surgery. So the Stentrode is a minimally invasive electrode array similar to a stent that can record or stimulate the brain or nerves from the blood vessels endovascularly. And this is very, very exciting. So definitely a company to watch. And there's probably if this works, they could advance the solution for the 5 million people in the US who are living with paralysis today. Thank you.
So where are they placing the stent if they are placing it endovascularly? What is the location?
Okay, I guess you have to read it up, Aram. I've already retweeted that article at
Oh, I was
TNA2W
asking
on Twitter.
because a lot of details was shared. So I was asking where is the location of the endovascular
Yeah,
stent placement?
yeah. I guess no one has an answer for you, so I guess you have to check it out later. Okay, next up is also shared by Katerina. Engineered mattress tricks your body to fall asleep faster. A new pillow and mattress system stimulates the body to trigger sleepy feelings by using heating and cooling sensations. Researchers say the new system helps people fall asleep faster and improves quality of overall sleep. Okay, I've retweeted the article too for those who are looking for better sleep. You can read it on. Okay, next one shared by okay, this one I think is shared already. Okay, hold on. Let me just refresh the page. Okay. I have to scroll down more because just now Tyler have already shared some, so anyone has anything interesting to want to share before
No,
I
but I
go
would
on to
like to
the
do some
next?
research on that Synchron product and
Yes.
let's bring it back to the group because I have a feeling this is a big trend that's coming.
Mm.
And, truthfully, I've never seen anyone who had a pacemaker inserted when a doctor told them they needed one refuse it because it had a web server. So there are many concerns, and we already know this from advertising, that people are willing to forfeit for convenience
and especially if it has to do with their lives. So, um, I I know that this is a tech room where people are very concerned about data security, but in healthcare, often it's a trade-off between risks and benefits. It's never 100% safe, and people get to a point in their life. If you're passing out, and risking uh, falling or dying because you have a heart arrhythmia of some kind that can be fixed by a pacemaker or a Watchman or some other device, you're going to do it.
Well, I think the point isn't whether or not you would do it, Dr. Francine. It's what the risk is for all of us in the population. So, in other words, my dad's got a pacemaker. Everybody gets older. Many people have pacemakers, and yeah, if you were an IT guy or gal coming out of this room, and you're like, wow, there's security risk. Of course, you're going to get a pacemaker, but what kind of power does that give hackers, right? And
Well,
in other countries that have evil intent. So that's, I think, the point.
where this reached the public zeitgeist was about 15 years ago when Vice President Dick Cheney was aware that his pacemaker could be hacked in a programmed cell death equivalent. And that was all across the media, and that was more than a decade ago when he was active vice president. So, um, the point you're making is 100% correct, and that is these second order risks pale in comparison to the first order risk of dying from an arrhythmia, but the second order risks exist and are manageable and should be better managed.
Yeah, John, to jump in, it's another area of IoT security, right? And just for people to understand, so it's not that people are going to turn this down because they've got the web server in their pacemaker.
Precisely,
It's
precisely.
yeah, it's wrapping that in at the outset because again, this is a more important area, but IoT security, so Internet of Things for people for connected devices, your things around your home and everything else, your cat feeder, your Ring doorbell, and all of those don't have great security, and neither who knows what the security is on these devices. Same with your Tesla car, et cetera. Everything's connected now. So it's just understanding that and building in the security that they can at the outset and being aware of that.
Yeah,
I think
and Andy,
security is non-existent in those devices. If any of you seen the Netflix documentary Bleeding Edge, I mean, I think this is just going to get worse with everybody rushing to and creating new devices constantly, medical devices. I think it's just going to get worse. There's no profit in putting security into these devices. Most companies are trying to create a minimal viable product, which just is just a terrible term. And getting it in your hands, making the money, and at the end of the day, if they get caught on security, they'll fix it if and when they're caught.
Yeah,
Right,
and
but it's bringing
it
that
is.
forward, Phil. It's bringing that forward because the thing is you're right. It's when they get caught or when the dangers happen. But there are more regulators looking into it. I mean, it's that tension, as you're saying, getting to market. Do they care getting something out versus you had privacy by design, which is still a big issue decades later. Security by design is a word that, again, it's not necessarily applied.
Yeah, and just to draw a fine point on the reality of this, so I personally had a career determining decision I had to make about 10 years ago when one of our vendors introduced the NotPetya virus into our environment on a laptop, contrary to all contract terms. And then an unauthorized laptop inserted on our network contaminated us with NotPetya. We had the ability to monitor the spread of NotPetya across our infrastructure, including our IoT devices in all our ICUs across the country. And I had to make the decision to just disconnect all critical IoT devices across the country in order to prevent the spread of the NotPetya virus, which could have been far more dangerous. Suffice it to say that nobody died. I didn't lose my job, but that was a pretty scary decision, and it reveals the extent to which 10 years ago we were blind to these kinds of issues. So at least now someone needs to go on mute.
Sorry, it's
But
Sharon. Hold on. Let me unmute. Yeah. Okay.
it it reveals we didn't know which devices where I was shutting off. That's how bad it was at that time. Now we've since the company has reacted appropriately to that state of the art failure, and we now know where the devices are and who's attached and what the implications of disconnecting them from the network are. But 10 years ago, that was completely flying blind. I got to run
Okay.
to another call. Bye.
We're not much further along at this point from a security standpoint.
Okay. Katerina has just shared another article which is quite interesting. I'll just read the title and yeah, she can share it. Serving as a quote clinical colleague, AI shows potential to reduce sepsis deaths in real world studies. Katerina, you want to share this?
Yeah, so yeah, as we probably all know, sepsis is, the most in hospital deaths, in at least in the United States each year. And John Hopkins University, they made a study to detect early signs of sepsis in real time, and they did this with 590,000 participants at 5 hospitals via their electronic health records since 2018. And they evaluated then 6,000, around 900 patients that were flagged that could be in life-threatening conditions soon. And they were then confirmed within 3 hours in hospital mortality, organ failure, length of hospital stay, and so on. And yeah, they could reduce the likelihood of death by sepsis by 20%. And this was published in Nature Medicine. So this is, I think, a quite important study for the future. Thank you.
I'm not understanding clearly how exactly is it able to detect or determine sepsis prior to. You talked about length of stay. Are they looking at patients who have an extended length of stay? And is that a marker? Exactly how are they determining this? Because there are systems in place in healthcare as it is for long-term patients. I'm trying to see exactly where this would be beneficial.
This sounds like hospital acquired pneumonia and those sorts of things. I think in the hospital, it's especially can be quite dangerous for people who are already immunocompromised. And that was actually my experience coming out of one of my surgeries. Boom, pneumonia right there. And I think if we can reduce any sort of infection like sepsis, which is especially, can be quite fatal, you can lose a limb, life. So I also have the question of what is the mechanism or action? Is it a metadata analysis? So it's really exciting.
Is it yet another alert? I mean, I'm
Uh,
trying to understand how this makes sense because
so
essentially, if a
if
patient is diagnosed and tracked to be in the hospital for more than 20 days, there are teams to speak to possible infections such as sepsis or bed infections. We have teams for that. I'm
so
concerned that if it's an
uh,
AI generated,
wait,
it would just be like
can
a notification.
I just answer, or do we want to keep asking the question? So they use these
I'm sorry, that was very
um
rude. I'm just gonna have to say it. That was especially given that you take a lot of
no,
space whenever you need to.
you're asking a question and trying to answer it without reading the paper, so it's running around in circles. Um, so so they use those teams, right? That flagged patients, that pre-flagged patients, and that they could maybe be in risk, under risk and life-threatening conditions. And they claim that, especially in sepsis cases, they need to be confirmed within 3 hours to reduce hospital mortality, organ failure, length of hospital stay. And apparently, I didn't like invent the wheel again. They just were faster at confirming that it's actually a sepsis, and that kind of reduced the mortality rate by 20%. But I invite you to in the link to read the actual paper in Nature Medicine. I can share it if you would like. Then, that would probably answer all the methods question that I haven't read yet.
So I wanted to sort of add to this, if it's relevant. There's a startup that I met the founder of about 6 months ago called Rubitection. They were part of an accelerator at out of Berkeley that is they're a medical device startup, and they're developing, it's sort of an early stage pressure detection assessment tool in hospitals to detect for and I don't understand sepsis as well as I'm sure those of you in the medical field do, but it's had amazing results in terms of detecting the earliest signs of sepsis and other types of I guess comorbidities within for those who spend a lot of time in hospitals or have the sorry, that are my brain is not working this morning. So anyways, I'd urge you to sort of look at Rubitection as well if you have interest in this, because they are just now looking into getting into some clinical trials as well. So it's a very interesting field and some great advancements.
Thank you, Tina. We have exhausted all the tweets. So please keep more tweets coming in if you see any interesting articles. So if not, I've pinned the room that Ben has just started. It's called The Miracle of Passive Solar. So if you're interested, please join us in the next room. If not, we'll see you next week. Today is Friday for me. Yeah. So next week then, Monday. See you on Monday. Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
Thanks,
Cheryl.
everyone. Have a great weekend.
Same
Thanks,
bad
Cheryl.
time,
Have
same
a
bad
great
channel.
Thank
day.
Ma
you.
salama.
Tyler, who can't hear us.
Bye
See
bye.
you
Adios.
on Monday.